said feminism is
neutral. Here's what actually happened.
The foundation of all
money. I'm really mad that
what difference does it make, right? What
Stop.
The deregulation of the industry is obviously going to cause more of that industry.
And to lubricate the trust connection between people until they have enough.
Yet we could still look at biological reality in determining who's a female, even if there are.
Why don't you denounce feminism the same way you're denouncing capitalism? If you don't...
For something to be objective, it needs to be verifiable. And you can't verify...
If I make a claim as a political pundit, it is true that I definitely could be wrong. That you're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main method of politics, right? This is my ideology. So 2015, anyone go back and watch the footage? The first GOP debate.
Oh, Robert. Oh, that? With a crowbar, you said?
And
you went in there.
For the record, everyone who sees this, I always tell everyone before I put them backstage, I put you back on stage 30 seconds before the video ends. So just know not to pick your nose at that time. So Joshua is, of course, running with it and owning every bit of booger up there. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sara, the Raging Tomato, here bringing to you live another debate with Ryan, the Radical Coder, and Joshua Stacy from Stream Rift. This evening, they're going to be duking out the question of universal suffrage. Do all adults have the right to vote? Ryan, if you'd like to begin with your opening statement, please.
Sure. Give me just 1 second. Okay. We are having this debate in a very specific moment. Last year, Jeffrey Epstein was heard on tape calling Donald Trump his closest friend for a decade. And this week, the House released tens of thousands of pages of new Epstein files, including emails where Epstein writes that Trump knew about the girls and calls him dangerous and the worst man he'd ever known. Trump is calling it a hoax and pushing Republicans to block full transparency, while one of his most loyal allies, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is on national TV saying that Trump's decision to brand her a traitor for supporting the Epstein files vote has put a target on her back. All of this comes just weeks after voters delivered a 2025 blue wave, Democrats sweeping major races in Virginia, New Jersey, and New York in what analysts call a clear rejection of MAGA. And instead of asking why they're losing voters, Republicans in Texas pushed a mid-decade map drawn at Trump's direction that civil rights groups say was engineered to strip Black communities of political power. They're now being sued under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That's the backdrop of this debate. A moment entangled in the Epstein scandal, turning on its own, rejected by voters, and trying to cling to power by redefining who counts, which of course brings us to tonight's topic. When this debate was pitched to me, the topic was women shouldn't vote. That one sentence captures the whole danger. The moment you accept disenfranchising any group of adults, you accept that a majority can silence any adults it decides are the wrong kind of people. Women, low IQ voters, people who don't follow politics the way you do. I'm not here to negotiate with Josh over a nicer target. You don't get that power over any adult, full stop. And we know what happens when we pretend that you do. At the founding of this country, only about 6% of the population, property-owning white men, could vote. After Black men gained formal suffrage, Mississippi's 1890 convention rewrote its constitution to entrench white supremacy through a hand-picked list of felony bans, crimes they openly associated with Black men. That Jim Crow disenfranchisement scheme is still on the books, and the Supreme Court recently refused to overturn it. Literacy tests in states like Alabama were deliberately confusing, administered arbitrarily, and used for decades to erase Black voters until the Voting Rights Act banned them, and even that act has been gutted. Pre-clearance eliminated in 2013 in Shelby County versus Holder, and Section 2 is now actively under attack. This is what protecting the quality of the electorate has meant in practice. Hang on 1 second.
Oh, Brian.
for the whiny wiener. Not protecting democracy from the people, but protecting power from the people it fears. My standard is one Americans already claim to believe. No taxation without representation. Every adult is taxed and fully subject to state power, arrests, fines, surveillance, even forced pregnancy in some cases, an increasing number of cases. If the government treats you as an adult when it wants your money and your obedience, you're adult enough to have a ballot. I'm not going to help Josh design the next clever category of unworthy adults. That logic produced the property test, literacy test, and Jim Crow felony bans. And it's the same logic behind women shouldn't vote. The line has to be bright and simple, and it is. All adults have the right to vote.
Thank you, Ryan and Joshua. To you, please.
All right. Right before this, Sara said we have 8 minutes. And to Ryan's credit, he used 3. And that's going to be good enough for me too, I think. We'll find out. So this is my second time debating on this channel. I'm excited. It's a 1v1. It can get a little more of a ruckus when you've got the 2v2s or the panels. I do think part of the reason why I'm excited to be here is I think just genuine discussions really lost art, especially in today's society. A lot of folks will find echo chambers and scream over each other. But substantive discussion about things, that really gets lost. Generally, I find Ryan to be a guy that seems to care about people, even what he just said here. This isn't, we need to, eat the rich and all this other good stuff. He's saying everybody should have a seat at the table. There's nothing wrong intrinsically like that. But I'm going to go ahead and say also, instead of me, right now I thought about maybe predicting some of the bad faith tactics Ryan's going to use and stuff like that. But instead, I'm going to appeal to his better nature, and we'll see how that goes. I do genuinely enjoy having conversations with people I disagree with. So hopefully we can get some engagement here. Voting is not really a moral right. It's the delegated civic power. We're saying the government's going to operate at the instructions of the voters. I'd say, we've got probably five pillars here. One is civic competence. Second is they got to actually have skin in the game. Third, independence from corrupting incentives. Fourth, capacity for rational, informed choice. And fifth, and this one's going to be a little bit dicey. I'm not sure I go 100% with this one, but I do think it's an important consideration, which is exclusive loyalty to the political community. We can get into a number of these, but fact of the matter is, we need to have an informed voter, not a manipulated or manipulatable voter. In terms of groups that we might want to take a look at from the competence standards, the severely mentally ill. A lot of folks aren't going to argue that hill anyway. Cognitively incapacitated, meaning the elderly. We've got Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that. Extremely low literacy individuals and individuals deemed legally incompetent in other domains. Folks that don't have skin in the game. One of the groups that I think is suspect is voters over the age of 75. They're towards the end of their life. Most of the consequences that they're voting for are not going to be felt by everybody else, felt themselves. And we've got an example, we say, well, how big of a deal is this? Take a look at Social Security and Medicare. A lot of times you're seeing the older folks are going to be the ones that are voting. If we would have taken some action to raising the age of retirement or any number of other modifications to the heading towards bankruptcy and deficiency, Medicare and Social Security programs, well ahead of 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it would have been easier. But we continue to have no politician's going to win over the primary voters by saying we need to make some sensible changes to Medicare or Social Security. We'll get into some of these other ones. Illegal immigrants, there's absolutely no reason they should be voting. We're going to maybe hear arguments that they don't. That's kind of crazy. Also, you've got folks that are just instantly, you got some different groups, foreign nationals or individuals with active political commitments. You've got government employees that are absolutely, being able to basically double dip on that. Then there's also more practical approaches, sort of such as temporary residents and individuals also that have been convicted of crimes. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good arguments for maybe not this everybody sitting at the table. And I'm going to say the biggest reason why we should be thinking about this is a country of over 330 million people with the largest military, strongest economy, and generally across all of known human history. So we need to be careful about how we're steering it and mindful about that, because the consequences could be grim. With that, I've used a minute more than Ryan, and I am ready to yield.
Thank you, Joshua. And as a kind reminder to everyone in the audience, both gentlemen are streaming to their own channels. If you'd like to make your way over, give a like, subscribe, and share. And particularly share this show right now with your father. He'll think I'm cute as a button. As for the debate, we will get through our debate. We will move into the super chats, reading and responding to your kind super chats. And then, of course, we will move into open panel, your most favorite part. So if you have something to say about this topic, just hang tight and we'll get you up here in a little while. Gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
All right, so I guess we can begin just kind of walking through maybe your 5 pillars, right? So I think
we can. I do have some questions about your opening, if you're
sure.
So I'm curious as to what the Trump, Epstein, all of that has to do with the topic of universal suffrage.
Oh, absolutely. So in the face of a sinking MAGA ship, Republicans are desperate to ensure that they win in the future. So that's why there is the redistricting efforts in Texas, which specifically are disenfranchising Black voters in Black communities, as I think was discussed on this panel just a few days ago. And MAGA is also, of course, regularly trying to add more restrictions to voting, as even in this conversation, perhaps you don't identify as MAGA, but the right seems to be increasingly trying to restrict who gets to vote. And I think it's because their policies are not very popular. At the end of the day, usually the popular vote goes to the Democrats. Trump was a rare exception in this past election. But as we've already seen with the recent blue wave, I don't think that's going to last. I don't think Republicans have much of a chance unless they start restricting the voter base, which is, I think, maybe why they are largely on your side with regards to.
So as interesting as all of that is, what does it have to do with the question of, do all adults have the right to vote?
Again, so we're talking about whether or not we should restrict people's right to vote, or we should increase the bubble of people who have the right to vote, or decrease the bubble of people who have the right to vote. And right now, the only way that a tainted lame duck president can ensure that his political party maintains power is by restricting the amount of people who have the right to vote.
So that sounds like an interesting, I guess, commentary on current politics. That's not at all to me what sort of we're discussing here, right? Fundamentally, what should that bar be? So we can discuss Republican redistricting. We can talk about voter fraud that the Democrats are incredible at. I got to tip my hat to them. I think they're going to do great coming up. I think they're fantastic at manipulating elections and convincing people that they don't manipulate, in fact, elections. But, starting point, what groups, let's see if we can find common ground or where we disagree. Do you think?
Maybe we can start with you substantiating your claim that Democrats are doing voter fraud.
Why should I do that? This topic is, do all adults have the right to vote? And so I'm not surprised you're jumping into something partisan. I will say I'm pretty impressed that you managed to work a forced pregnancy discussion into this. The point is, what is the bar for who should vote, and how do we establish that? So it sounds like you've got obviously a lot of butthurt you'd like to talk about conservatives. You're bothered about any number of interesting things. And sure, an open panel, I'd love to dig into any of that with you. But one of the things that I find challenging in a debate, if we're here to actually discuss something, I do think you disagree with me on any number of the voting criteria. But if we just ignore current topics, right? Let's ignore the redistricting. Let's say, just if it makes you feel better, assume I maybe even agree with you on everything you're saying. That doesn't get us to find out who should vote. And just to maybe help you short circuit it here, fine. I don't think ethnicity is a reason why people should or shouldn't vote. You're complaining that MAGA wants to, whatever MAGA is, wants to redistrict so blacks can't vote. I don't think that that's an exclusion. So I don't know if you have more of an argument to that than you want to say redistricting is racist or whatever, but I'm not even putting forth that I think there should be a restriction on ethnicity for voting. So I don't know how that has any relevance whatsoever to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so the relevancy is about restricting voting, who has the access, who has the right to vote, right? And so what I'm bringing up is specific things that are going on in the real world right now, which you may not want to talk about for a variety of reasons. You can say they don't pertain to the topic. I say they're extremely relevant to the topic because the topic, again, is about who should have the right to vote.
Okay,
and
so what is the group that you think is being excluded?
So I'm sorry, please.
Let him finish.
Right? So if we're going to talk about that, then it's important that the audience and both of us understand the stakes and the real world impacts of these decisions are that women are dying 2 times at the rate that they were before in states like Texas, which have removed abortion rights, and the rate of things like of dangerous pregnancies are also skyrocketing there, besides not doing so in other areas of the country. So when we reduce the rights to vote of people like women, which was, again, the original prompt for this debate, which so I'm not going to let you run from that. So when we're talking about the stakes of who gets to vote, obviously women are probably more likely to defend their right to choose than men are. So when we reduce their right to choose by taking away their right to vote, that would obviously put them in more danger. And that's just one example of adults in the United States who would be in danger because of their rights to vote being taken away, as you are proposing tonight.
So I'm not proposing we take anyone's vote away. The discussion here is to try to figure out what the criteria might be. Starting point is all adults should have that. I think right off the bat, there's some easy groups that you would even admit aren't a part of that. I'm gonna say, I'll ask you this question, and I don't want to yield my time on this one, but just a nice direct answer would be nice. What group is it you're saying is being excluded from that you're arguing? So I'm not going to run away from the women question. I think there's an actual discussion to be had on that one. And if you're welcome to actually push on something, that'd be great. If you're just here to rant about liberal talking points, fine. That's not what I came for.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it liberal talking points. You're asking me to identify a specific group that you're. This is your position. My position is that the default is that all Americans have the right to vote, and I believe that it should be extremely high bar to remove that right. And that seems to be what you're here to talk about, is to reduce who has access to that right, which already the status quo in America is that they already have that right. So.
Right. So what does the redistricting have to do with the criteria that we're looking at? And I'll clarify the question, and then I'll ask it again. So I listed off some groups. The advanced elderly, if they're 75 on up, they're not going to be living with the consequences. Maybe they don't have a stake in it. If we've got folks that are not paying any taxes into the system, they don't have buy in it. That probably shouldn't be voted. Maybe there's an argument there. That's something you could push back on. I think that folks that have dual citizenship probably shouldn't be voting. I think you should be 100% involved in the community that you're voting in, because that's what the consequence is for. If I moved to Germany and I got dual citizenship and I was voting in Germany, I would be voting America first, because I'm an American, and that's really where my loyalty lies. So I think that that's another group that we should be looking at. Those all qualify as adults. They're all where I would say, and this is why I say liberal talking points. You brought up forced pregnancy. I don't know how that has anything at all to do with it. Now, if you want to go into the women argument, go ahead and bring that up. But what I'm going to challenge you to do is actually identify the groups that you are claiming to be protecting. You went off on something initially, well, they're trying to get blacks out of the vote. And I told you point blank, I don't think ethnicity should be a criteria for whether you should or should not vote, which really makes me confused as to why you're bringing any of that up whatsoever, other than perhaps you're trying to deflect from actually engaging substantively with the criteria here.
Yeah, so I'm happy to engage. So we started with old people, right? So you said people over 75. You think they don't have skin in the game. You acknowledge, of course, that if we vote for policies that affect how much Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, that they have, then they are impacted directly by those policies, right?
Sure.
Okay, so they do in fact have literal skin in the game. Okay.
But they have less skin in the game on account of the fact that they're on their way out. For example, if they voted on a 10-year, 20-year, 50-year program, that's going to be impacting a lot of the younger folks, not to mention when they vote to say, don't lower Social Security, don't raise retirement age, don't do all of that stuff. It's very self-serving for them and literally for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, you've got 22-year-olds right now, and I'm sure you love crying about this one. Can't buy a house, can't afford food, can't afford this, can't afford that. So why let folks who only have a limited stake in the ongoing nature here have that much control over policy decisions that are going to be more of a lasting impact on the younger folks?
Yeah, so it sounds like your suggestion now has moved from having skin in the game to having less skin in the game, and now even further away to just saying that they might vote in policies that you might not like or I might not like. I believe that people who vote for policies that I might not like should still have the right to vote. I believe that Republicans should all have the right to vote, even though I think they are currently voting this country into a disaster. I mean, that's not really an argument to remove people's rights to vote.
Well, the point isn't who should and shouldn't vote. You and I are going to have a different take on it. I think we're going for outcomes. I think we need to actually take a look at what is the voting policy that's better for the country as a whole. And so for 10, 20, 30 years, we've had an aging population that's voted to ignore the Medicare issue, and that is a bubble that's going to burst and pop. So what I'd like to do at this stage of the debate is I in my opening, I listed off a bunch of groups. If you want to engage on some of those discussions, great. If you don't, that's fine too. right? The point here is to actually have a discussion about it. So one of the things that I like about being able to engage with folks in good faith is them actually pushing back on it. So yeah, would you at least acknowledge that having seniors voting to reinforce their Medicare and their Social Security payments and being unwilling to give up a single inch on that is long-term bad for the country?
I don't know if I would. I don't know if it's bad that old people have access to Medicare. In fact, I think it's probably a good thing. So no, I guess I would.
No, you didn't answer the question. The point is,
I did directly. Sorry, you asked me whether or not it was a good thing that old people would vote for those things, and I said, yeah, it probably is.
No, so let me pour some context that you might be missing here. Both of those programs are on a collision course with bankruptcy. And as is the case with collision courses, the earlier you make a course adjustment, the less drastic it has to be. So for example, and I don't have these exact numbers in front of me, 15 years ago, if we would have raised the retirement age by 6 months, the impact that as it would sit today would have been massive. And so what we have is a small segment of the population that benefits from voting in a particular way that becomes a sinkhole, not just for the next generation, but everyone after that. So the question isn't whether or not people should have Medicare or whether or not they should have Social Security. The question is, if we have a program that's set to implode, should we delay solving the problem and letting it get worse so that way some older folks can have a disproportionate amount of input when they're not even going to be around when the problem's happening?
Well, I guess number one, I'm not convinced that economists by and large agree that Medicare is like sailing us towards bankruptcy directly. I do want to point out a moment ago before that last shift, you did say you wanted me to actually push back on things you said. I believe that was what just happened right before that, ironically, which is when you outlined one group of people who you said probably shouldn't vote, people over 75. You said they didn't have skin in the game. I said, and then I pushed you on that. Then you said they have less skin in the game, and then I pushed you on that, and now we've moved on that. So obviously, I am directly engaging with your claims, right?
Well, I appreciate it, but you also you did, and I don't think this was bad faith, but you didn't repeat the argument. You were saying, should old people have Medicare? That isn't the argument. The argument is that these retirement programs are the largest amount of debt that the country has, and it's not that they're bankrupting the program; it's that they're underfunded and on a predictable trajectory. To speak to Medicare specifically, there's been a lot of money coming out of that through various programs. I used to sell Medicare Advantage programs. There's a lot of ways that have been looked at engaging with that. But unless we actually, like right now, we have decreasing tax base and an increasing liability on our Medicare and Social Security. So if you do agree that people should have Medicare and you do agree that Social Security should exist, then right now it's on a collision course with massive problems. So something needs to happen. So right now we have a small amount of the voter base, which is the elderly, who are very enthusiastic and engaged, and they're voting out of their self-interest, as one would expect, but it's to the detriment of everyone behind them. So how would you reconcile that one? So let's assume for a moment that they should vote. How do you reconcile that challenge?
Well, again, when you say we should assume for a moment, I'm already assuming that was the default, right? Like and it is the default in America right now. So we can assume that the reality is as it stands. Yes, I'm happy to do that. And old people can vote, and they might vote for things that I disagree with. In fact, many of them voted for Donald Trump overwhelmingly. Old people voted far more for Republicans and tend to vote far more for Republicans than younger people. So, I mean, again, they are going to vote for things that I don't like. They're going to vote for things that I view as destructive, and Democrats are going to vote for things that you might view as destructive. And, even if the economists did agree with you, which I'm very skeptical that they do, that Medicare in particular is this thing sending us on a crash course, I just don't see why people choosing things that you don't like would be a good argument to disenfranchise them.
Yeah, again, you're twisting a bit here, but that's fine. Maybe we should move on from this one. It sounds like we're not going to get too far with it. You don't even want to acknowledge that Medicare and Social Security are crashing, which is not just an opinion. It's an absolute fact that's been documented for quite some time. Fact of the matter is, for any sensible person looking at retirement planning, I'm 41. Anyone my age or younger should not be relying on Social Security and should assume that at best they're going to be getting 50 to 70% of the benefit that they're supposed to get. Now, meanwhile, this is while you're paying into a program and you're going to get a tiny fraction back of what you paid into it. And so the folks that are working right now to pay these Social Security and Medicare programs, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be funding those. I'm not taking that position. It's not about whether I like something or don't like something. It's 50, 100, 200 years from now. How does this country look if we make voting policies that let small groups steer the ship into the iceberg?
I'm sorry. Did you want to talk about Medicare? Medicare? Because I thought you said you didn't.
What?
I'm confused.
go ahead.
I apologize because I thought Ryan was trying to respond to that earlier, and then you said I don't want to talk about that, but then you are giving. I could be confusing it, but
Well, I'll clarify. It doesn't sound like he's willing to buy into the presupposition that Medicare and Social Security are on a collision course with massive financial problems. So if we can't agree on that underpinning, I don't know that there's going to be that much interesting discussion on that topic. So I was attempting to re-engage with it and point the picture. The other question is just in a broader sense, should small groups of voters be able to crash the country at the expense of the rest?
And this had to do with people having stake in the game, right? Because you mentioned earlier, like people having stake in the game in terms of being a citizen, so on and so forth.
Right, and it's the length of, and it's the amount of skin. So somebody with 75 years old is unlikely to spend as much time in this country as someone who's currently 25. Yet
but
they've been able
are
to
we
vote.
assuming that they don't have grandchildren or properties or like legacy properties or things being passed down? Because that to me would be stake in the game. That's why I want to kind of now I'm like a little confused where you're going with that.
I mean, they might philosophically have a stake, but frankly, once they passed away, they're no longer directly involved. They might care about their children. I'm not saying they don't. Obviously, a good part, like a part of a healthy community, is intergenerational lines, but ultimately, the consequence is falling on those behind them. So, Ryan, I'll put it to you. I mean, my premise is if you don't agree that we have a problem with those, then the rest of that discussion is a lot less interesting. So where would you like to go from
okay,
there?
So first of all, I'll agree with you that once they're dead, they shouldn't have the right to vote anymore. I'm totally fine with that. No,
Appreciate that.
But until then, obviously they do have skin in the game, as we discussed, and of course they have families who have skin in the game as well. So they are concerned with their families and themselves, as anyone would be. And to your last, I'm sorry, I just well, we were talking about whether or not small groups of people basically should be able to make decisions.
Right.
I think that. One of the points of ensuring that we have universal suffrage is to make sure that when we have smaller groups of people who might be subject to the whims of the majority, that they have protections, that they have a way to voice their positions, which is why it's so important that Black people, for example, or any minority have full voting rights, because they have historically been victim to the majority dictating what they should and were not allowed to do in this country in very particular ways. And so, I mean, yeah, I do think that we should make sure that small groups of people do have the ability to make their voices heard. Obviously, that doesn't mean that they always get to supersede the majority. That's not even how voting works. So I'm not super worried about that.
So I'm asking this directly. Do you think I believe that Blacks should not vote?
No, I'm using them as an example of what happens when we disenfranchise a smaller group of people.
Right. So you keep going to that argument, and I've already said 2 times here, I think that shouldn't be a criteria by which we block people, and you keep going back to it. So that seems confusing to me.
Well, sure, I can clarify again. So I'm not saying that Josh believes that we should racially disenfranchise people. I hope that's not the case. I wouldn't expect you to defend that. I'm glad that you're not. I appreciate that. But I'm using this as an example of what happens historically in this very country that we both love and enjoy, to people who don't have the right to vote, who don't have the right to have their voices heard. They are pressured by the majority in ways that are horrific. Their voices are not heard, they are not valued, and they are disrespected and oftentimes even killed. And it's a bad thing usually for those groups of people that we disenfranchise, which is why I don't want to do that without extreme justification, which I don't think you've provided here for any group of people so far.
All right, so I'm just going to ask you about a few groups. We'll just bat through them. There's some we may agree on, some we may not. But okay. So illegal immigrants, should they vote or not vote?
I don't think that illegal immigrants should vote. Although personally, I am open to local at a local level, people having different programs that might allow them to influence, have some voice. I mean, they are, again, adults living in the country. They are often working in the country. They are often paying taxes in the country. I'm potentially open to some districts experimenting with that. I wouldn't make it a federal policy that illegal immigrants have a right to vote in the country. But
all right, we'll call that a win. Illegal immigrants that are adults in this country shouldn't vote. I'm here for it. We've already got some common ground on that. I don't think it's super controversial. Next group, dual citizens. So let's say I'm Israeli or I'm German and I get dual citizenship. Should I be able to vote?
So when you say dual citizenship, I take that to mean that we're referring to people who are citizens of the United States of America and citizens of another country.
Correct.
Okay, so they are citizens of the United States of America. So I would say they do have the right to vote here and should have the right to vote here.
All right. So are you concerned at all with the disproportionate amount of dual citizens in Congress?
Not necessarily.
Well, I mean,
Congress is selected through a democratic process, right? People elect their congressmen, right?
That's the dream they tell us. That's the lie they tell us. Do you believe that elections accurately represent the will of the people in these races?
I mean, the people who vote, generally, I believe that voting generally is properly counted. Yeah, I mean, do you have evidence otherwise?
Well, I'll push back in the sense that the easiest way. So last year I ran for public office. I ran for state senate in Nevada Senate District 6. My opponent has been here for 30 years. Had $100,000 in her campaign. I'd been here for 3. I had 1,500. I got 28% of the vote. By and large, and that was like the lowest priority thing I was doing. I did like 5 events for it. I sent out a handful of mailers. I did a few door knocking, and that was pretty much it. And the resonance on that was the local voters really engaged with me because they saw that I was a disruption to it. And I learned a lot about the campaign mechanics far and away from just who can vote. For example, there's an enormous amount of money that gets moved around in these campaigns, and I do not believe that the vote represents what the by and large what the populace wants. I'll give you a less charged example than some that I could use. Real estate developers love funding politicians, and you might say, well, is this about zoning or what is it? The fact of the matter is, as long as they can keep property rates high, they can make a lot of money. The way real estate developers usually make money is they'll have some land and they'll want to develop it. Now, if you develop in an area where land is scarce because it's limited, right? If I have 10 acres in Las Vegas and I build housing versus 10 acres in the middle of rural Nevada, the property, the wood's going to cost the same, the labor is going to cost about the same, but I might get half or less for building somewhere where it would actually be more affordable. And so the way that a lot of corporations shove this down the throats of a voter and make them think that they're doing a public good is they'll say, we're supporting subsidized housing, low-income housing. Isn't this great? But what they're really doing is propping up the real estate market by taking tax dollars to build units for folks that will live in. And the rest of the people that are fighting for rent are going to be fighting amongst what's left. So it drives real estate prices up, which means real estate developers make more money. And I do not believe that an informed voter base would be voting against their own interest. What type of a voter would pay taxes into a system that's funding the very mechanics that make the cost of their housing higher?
Okay, so this kind of feels like an argument from incredulity, right? Like you're basically arguing that why would these people vote for this thing? It seems like it goes against their interest by your own analysis. I can't tell you why people might vote for things that go against their own interests. I mean, we have Donald Trump in office right now with this big, beautiful bill, which is slashing Medicare, which is, destroying. The Republicans are currently refusing to negotiate about the ACA premiums. These are things that are going to hurt millions of people in this country, are probably disproportionately rural Republican voters. So yeah, I mean, people do vote against their own interests oftentimes. We can talk about how it'd be better if we had a more informed voting base. I don't think the solution to a less informed voter base is disenfranchising people. I think the solution is better access to education for those things, providing ways for people to learn more about how our government works and what they can do about it, and how they can let their voices be heard, and what's actually going on in the government. I don't see why that's not a more obvious pathway than again just removing their right to vote or pointing to their votes for things that you don't like and saying, oh, someone must have cheated somewhere along the way. I mean, I'm happy to acknowledge that like money in politics causes a lot of problems. I'm happy to even entertain reform about what that looks like and what it should look like for people to be able to influence politics with money. But again, these are whole separate conversations. None of this has anything to do with whether or not we should restrict people's right to vote, which I don't see any group in that that And I'll also withhold the easy dunk saying that, oh, you obviously just want to remove people's right to vote, so you would have won. I won't lean too heavy on that.
No, like you have a really overly simple view of the political landscape. And you seem to, one of the ways that manifests is you seem to paint me in a box, and you say things like I would have won. I didn't win in this last election. I'm a constitutional conservative. There's nothing that represents me on the presidential ballot that's getting anywhere near the amount of votes it would take to win. The other thing is the ACA credits you're talking about is an interesting topic, but the fact of the matter is it's not what we're talking about here. The whole ACA credits thing, when the ACA got involved, and I'm just going to do like a 30 seconds on this. I was a health insurance agent for 10 years. The ACA, there was a study that the HHS did that was withheld from Congress before the vote on the ACA, and it said it was going to double and triple premiums. So I would say that the ACA created the problems that we're claiming that it's not. Well, we need more subsidies here. So, but I'm going to go back to my question and ask you, why do you? So you said it's argument from incredulity, and I think that you're assuming bad faith where none exists. I'll ask you this question again: why do you think an informed voter would vote for a candidate that is supporting real estate programs that are designed to increase the cost of housing? It's not a rhetorical question. I'd love to hear.
Well, again, I can't
it's
possibly tell you. I'm not.
Yeah, it's anecdotal
Well,
in a. Go ahead, Ryan. I apologize.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, again, like I don't know. I'm not pretending to know. I never argued that I have some deep understanding of the housing market and why people vote for specific things regarding them. I'm happy to assume that I just really don't know why people. Perhaps you could ask them. Perhaps we could look at polls for why people say they voted for particular candidates that might implement these policies. I mean, that might be a good way to figure it out, right?
I'm wondering if maybe, Joshua, you should make the claim that people who vote against their own interest should not have the right to vote. If that's the claim you're making, then maybe Ryan can respond to that. But to understand people's intentions or understand why people are voting one way or the other, he would never have a sound reason for any of that. He wouldn't know, right? But if you're going to make the claim that all people shouldn't have the right to vote because they vote against their own self-interest, then that might actually prompt a further discussion, if that makes sense to both of you. But even at that, it's still like varying.
Well, to be fair, I think what he was saying wasn't necessarily that like we should block those people from voting because they're not voting in their own interest. What he's saying is that why would these people do that? Something seems fishy here. That's what he's arguing. And I'm saying, well, I mean, maybe that's what your analysis suggests. I don't think that's sufficient for assuming that there's been like mass voter fraud. I would be more inclined to assume that people are voting on some different basis than you are pointing at, right? People are voting for a different reason than just that they perceive housing to be going up, whether or not it even is like based on those candidates or whatever.
Well, you seem to misunderstand the nature of the question. I'll clarify it. And Sarah, your comments dig in on that one even a bit more. It was more of a probing question. I have an answer to it, but generally before I give an answer, I'd like to hear what you might think. So if you're not of the opinion that you would guess why people would do that, I think the answer is because there's an entire machine behind prepping voters to vote in a particular way. And that's how corporations and special interests manipulate elections. And unfortunately, when we take a look at every adult having the vote, that means every vote could be hijacked by a corporation, by a special interest group, by whatever. So any group that is prone to being manipulated becomes a part of the challenge there. And I'm willing to say that this is more of a structural problem with the way that the voting exists. I don't think it's an argument for people shouldn't vote because they voted for bad thing. It's if they're voting for things and they're being manipulated, certainly that's a problem for everybody. And so part of this goes back to the low intelligence voter, where you say if you're so low intelligence that you're easily manipulated, is that a greater risk to society? So I don't know if there's any of that you think we could find some common ground on. I'm not expecting you to be clairvoyant and understand, why people do what they do. But can you see the issue and the risk there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to acknowledge that people oftentimes are fed streams of disinformation, misinformation that convince them to vote for candidates and policies that are going against their own interests. again, like whether or not these people are necessarily low info voters or low like intelligence voters, I think as you put it, I can't say that for sure. I think oftentimes people make decisions for their own personal reasons that I may not always have, again, the clairvoyance to recognize, right? Like I don't know exactly why anybody votes for any particular candidate except for by looking at polling data or by talking to individuals, I guess, but that's not going to give you an aggregate view. So I mean, I fully acknowledge that people can be somewhat manipulated by propaganda. I think we are all subject to propaganda. We are all can be victimized by it. We can all be steered in different directions than we might otherwise go. But I hardly see what that has to do with whether or not we should like block anyone's right to vote.
All right. Well, I'm gonna push you on this one. So if it sounds like you agree that there's a risk if we have unintelligent voters that are being manipulated. So how do we mitigate that? So if you're saying, Josh, no, this is the right, we must all have it. And let's say I want to believe you, but I'm saying this looks like a real problem. How do I agree with you and feel safe at night?
Well, I guess I would focus on trying to restrict the companies that you say are doing this propaganda, right? You would try to like start from the top down. It'd probably be easier to do as with the government than trying to identify everybody who's actually being propagandized and voting in a different way, rather than people who are just voting in a way that you might not agree with, and trying to discern between those people and infringing on people's fundamental rights that they've fought for hundreds of years. It seems like a weirder way to approach it than just trying to do again like maybe overturning things like Citizens United might be. I'm not even 100% sure that I want to do that, but I mean perhaps that's one approach to reducing this sort of influence of money in politics that then again disenfranchising people.
So one of the solutions I've had for dealing with the low information voter, I think there's an allergic reaction you're going to have to it. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is when you have the allergic reaction, use your words and talk me through it. I'm not trying to, but what would you think about a 10-question test at the polls? And I don't care if the answers are everywhere, right? Name 3 branches of government, just some basic civic test that shows some engagement. Would you be in support of any type of, from the government level, of voter education or voter sensibility? I have to take a test to drive a car. I have to take a test to sell insurance. I have to take a test to do all these other things. Why doesn't vote, thoughts on that one?
Well, historically, we had things like this, and they were very selectively graded in a way that disenfranchised people who the people grading them decided they wanted to. So, I mean, I think already that sets a bad taste in my mouth. But other than that, I just don't see again, like my position on how we should handle low info voters is not try to get them out of the pool through some sort of filter like a civics test. It would rather be like, how do we give more people access to this information so that we don't have to worry about as many people being low info voters? How do we make more people choose to get a political education? I mean, this is America, land of the free. I don't want to, I wouldn't want to focus on, again, filtering out voters rather than providing more resources to make sure they are well informed.
All right. Do you think in terms of transient folks, so someone moves to an area, they just moved there, should they have the same, all right, for example, do you think the transients should have the same level of voting power that, for example, long-term residents would have?
I mean, yeah, by default, I would assume so, unless, I mean, I guess if some locales want to try some particular thing that does it a little bit differently, I might be open to that, but I think generally that seems fine. I feel like we would have to have like remarkable circumstances to even begin to be concerned about that, like mass immigration to one particular area, and then suddenly we see a lot of things overturned and stuff. But even then, like, those are the people who are living there now. So like, why shouldn't we? Why would my feelings about what they should vote for, or what they might be voting for, make it justified to limit their right to vote when, again, they're going to be living in that area. They're going to be subject to its laws. They're going to be subject to its property taxes. They're going to have to go to their kids are going to go to the schools. They're going to have to go to the hospitals. I mean, it seems weird to, again, try to remove their voice from the pool.
What about criminals? And the way that it sits right now, felons are excluded from voting. They can petition to have it back. What are your thoughts on that? All felons should vote?
I believe we probably should let felons vote. So this is a controversial one, I guess, but I think people don't understand that the history of this, as I mentioned in my opening, was during when black men got the right to vote. That Mississippi then modified their constitution to make it so that felons couldn't vote, and they particularly targeted felonies that they themselves identified or believed were more likely to be committed by black men. So they were, again, this was already a racialized process from the get-go. And I mean, it is the case right now that black men are, I believe, like 33% of black men have a felony. So this is again, like de facto kind of racialized disenfranchisement. But besides all that, I mean, if some, like in Florida, we recently a few years ago, we voted for people who had already served their time, who were convicted felons, to have some pathway to to get their rights to vote back. And after the people voted, majority of people voted for that to happen, we suddenly saw the Republican government here try to put more roadblocks in place to try to reduce these people's access to get that right to vote back, even though, again, the majority of Floridians supported it. And I personally, I would vote for that anywhere I lived. I think, especially if people have served their time, I see no reason to restrict their right to vote. And I'm even open to people who already committed a felony going and voting, or like having access to a ballot. I mean, I'm not scared they're gonna like legalize murder or some shit like that. I just don't. It seems weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'll say that since you say all adults should have the right to vote, agreeing that a felon shouldn't have a right to vote, at least during their incarceration, that pokes a hole in it. But I'll give you, there's some consistency on it for you to say, once they've done their time, that should be the end of it. If we've decided they're extracted or exiled from society for whatever the time of their sentence is, when they come back, if we don't want them to be going back into that lifestyle, we should actually re-embrace them. So there's a consistency on that one. Now let's get to the one that I think really gets up your craw that we do disagree on. And you're going to argue for this one, and I'm going to argue against it. And I'm going to ask you to, again, really dissect it and assume I'm going to listen to what you're saying and I'm not coming at this from a bad place. So why should people be able to vote for wars when they're never going to have to fight in those wars? And of course, I'm talking the women vote.
Well, again, I mean, the way when we vote to go into a war or something like that, we are not only impacted at the point where you go out into the field, right? We are also impacted based on public impacts of being at war with another country. Husbands go to war, sons go to war, people who obviously have major impacts on women's lives. So I mean, even if that was the axis by which we decided whether or not someone should have the right to vote, is like whether or not they're directly impacted by like a draft, which I think you're kind of getting at. I mean, women are impacted by the draft. Their husbands can go die in the draft, and their sons can go die in the draft. People they depend on can go die in the draft, and also plenty of men who are outside the age range of the draft cannot be, selected for the draft. So I mean, should we not allow those men to vote when it comes to things regarding war powers? I mean, that seems like a very weird position, right?
Well, so I'll dig into that a bit more, but I'll ask this question before I get into it. Who is the primary victim in war? Men or women?
I mean, I guess it depends on what happens in the war, right? Probably men who are fighting the war, but I mean, if we're like bombing, like when we dropped a nuke on Japan, like who was the primary victim? It was Japanese people. It wasn't like men or women.
Right. So there were presumably men there as well. But who's like the primary one? Or do you say there's no primary one? It's all equal. The body counts the same on both sides and they're impacted the same way.
No, I'd say men are probably disproportionately killed, especially in like on the ground combat. Yeah, of course.
Okay. And I'll give you that impacts the women in their lives too. And people they have brothers, sisters, brothers, dads, uncles, all that. You really can't get past the fact that, for example, in the US, the selective service, you're right, there's an age band on it. And I'm 41 now, so they're probably not going to draft me, but it's also not, they're never going to draft me. And also during that time, I was on the hook for it. If we take a look at Ukraine, they did a draft and they're drafting old men and they keep drafting older men and they're getting into it. So ultimately, when we're looking at voting, if men are primarily the ones that are going to put their blood out on the field, should they not have more say in what's going on?
Well, I guess again, like we can talk about them. If the only axis is them putting blood on the field, then I guess you can make that argument. But that seems like a reductive view of the impacts of war. Again, there are tons of economic impacts of going to war with another country. There are global impacts of going to war with another country. There's immigration impacts. Everybody around the world is impacted when people go to war. I mean, if we're gonna if we're just looking at it as like a sliding scale, yeah, there might be men, particularly in the draft age or military age, who are more likely to have blood in soil because they've been sent to war. But I just don't see that as justification to not allow other people to engage in the civic responsibility that is voting for people who might end up making those decisions.
All right, so we got 20 people in a room, and 10 of them get to vote for the other 10 to go to war, but they don't have to go themselves. Who do you think is like, so let me ask you this. If you don't like that axis as an oversimplification and you're going to dog on it as being reductivist, what axis or axi would you use, if not that, and or how would you balance that one out?
Well, I'm not looking for an axis to disenfranchise people. That's what you're doing here.
How is it not disenfranchising to know that about half the voter base can vote your gender to war and they don't have to bear the brunt of that?
Well, we don't usually vote to go to war, so I'm not following that.
That's true, but we should. Congress should be voting to go to war. We haven't been doing that. In U.S. history, we've sort of given up on that, but we do vote for the people that vote to go to war. No?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they do a bunch of other stuff too.
Okay. Just looking through here. All right. What about the mentally ill? What either the mentally ill, meaning the schizophrenics, or the mentally challenged, meaning those that, for example, are below 70 IQ, or I'm going to say even maybe below 80. How do you, they also should be on this, or where would you draw those lines?
I mean, we can do case by case for people in extreme situations, but I mean, if people don't have the ability to go to a voting booth or don't have the ability to fill out a ballot because they're mentally incapable, I mean, I guess that problem's already solved, right? They literally don't have the physical ability. But I mean, if they're people, again, if we're pointing to people who might be mentally deficient in some sense, or we look at people who are just, seem to be voting, I don't know, in a kind of schizophrenic manner, I don't know, that's okay. I already view Republicans as often doing that, so I might let a handful of schizophrenics might potentially vote for more reasonable candidates than the Republican Party at this point in time. But I don't know. I'm not super worried about schizophrenics voting in another schizophrenic. I guess what are we concerned about here?
Well, I mean, on as it sits right now, a lot of states allow for mail-in voting. Before I go beating on that one too hard, do you think that that's a legitimate way to vote?
Yeah, of course.
So let's say you've got a schizophrenic. It's documented. The doctor says they're schizophrenic. They're on a disability of some type. We mail them out a ballot and it comes in. Do you think they filled it out, or do you think maybe someone else filled it out?
I mean, I know people personally with schizophrenia who are diagnosed schizophrenic, and they're perfectly capable of voting and doing day-to-day things. I mean, we have treatment for. Are you saying they're like extremely low function? Like I said, we can handle this on maybe a case-by-case basis, but I just don't see. Yeah, I don't see justification for restricting quote unquote mentally ill people's right to vote as like a blanket or even any particular diagnosis.
So that was fair pushback on the schizophrenia. There are certainly folks that are schizophrenic who are functional and all of that. But if we assume there's someone who is just not functional, they don't have the executive function to actually understand what's going on and participate in the process, as long as they're still on the voting rolls and we're mailing them a vote, that becomes a liability, because it's unlikely, right? If we're assuming that there's some segment that is not capable of understanding what's going on, yet there's ballots going out, and if those are coming back, that means it's not their vote. And so, I think that's a risk of not having policies that look out for that. Would you agree on that? Disagree? Pushback?
I mean, I guess it could be. I see this as like a probably a negligible, like we're looking at a hyper specific set of circumstances now where we're imagining people who are completely incapable of voting and they're getting a mail-in ballot and one of their family members is filling it out, I guess, for them. I mean, I guess there are probably old people who this might happen to a lot. I just, at the end of the day, like, I mean, if we want to have court, if we want to challenge in court, you want to say like you want to have a case where you're folks like, hey, this person, there's no way this person voted, and you want to like go settle that. We can have, that's what we have courts for, is to settle these sorts of issues and these sort of civil disagreements about what happened. So I mean, I don't see why we would make a blanket disenfranchisement policy of people under a certain capacity or whatever, instead of just like engaging with these things like when they happen, if they're happening, you know.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I think we've gone through the groups that I have. I think we've made the points that we're going to make. I don't know if there's anything, you know, I will say that I do think one of the biggest problems with voter disenfranchisement right now across the board is the type of rhetoric that Ryan opened with, and he's done a little bit of through here. Ryan, overall, I think, to be honest, you've been a bit of a gentleman here, and I appreciate that. I think sometimes maybe there was a misunderstanding, and I tried to be clear, and we cleaned that up. But as long as we're using the argument of, you know, libtards and republitards and maggots and all this other stuff, a lot of folks are turned off to voting, not because they're not competent, not because they're not allowed to vote. The fact of the matter is, right now, you're arguing that all adults should have the right to vote, and so many that do actually don't participate in it. So you've brought up disenfranchisement. The argument that you've used a lot is we shouldn't be trying to disenfranchise voters. So I guess I'll end on this. If you really believe that all adults should vote, then how do we not disenfranchise people with the nasty rhetoric, with the uselessness here of, for example, going back and forth and saying, well, republitards this, maggots that, all this stuff. Like, it's not even interesting. It's just venom.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about disenfranchisement, I would point to like concrete examples, like what Trump just directly ordered to happen in Texas, which disenfranchised millions of Black Americans. For example, I'm not thinking about people hearing me say mean words online and not voting because of it. I can't imagine anybody's listening to me who was going to vote for a Republican and they're like, well, Ryan said I was a doofus for doing so, which I do think you're a doofus for doing so. And if you decide not to vote for Republicans, that's fine with me. I don't want to take away your right to vote for Republicans. That's going to be the difference. Yeah, I just don't see how that's. I guess I'll throw back to one. No, I mean, I just don't see. I just don't see that how that follows at all. I'll leave it there.
All right. Well, if I may develop it, the fact of the matter is, most people are allergic to talking about politics now. This didn't used to be the case. It's very divisive. It's a lot of clapbacks, a lot of just folks just ranting at each other. And so most of these folks, again, you're saying all adults should vote. It's so sacred. We should let the indigent, we should let the old, the senile, the whatever, everyone should do it. And you know what? God bless democracy. I'm here for it. But let me ask you this. The fact of the matter is, if folks aren't engaging, which means it, so let me back up. If we had 90% voters, or 90% of voters were voting in the primaries, it wouldn't be so easy to manipulate this. If we had real voter education and folks actually felt empowered to have discussions about things instead of just getting talked over and screamed at. I mean, you've been on a lot of panels here. There's a lot of folks that will sit here and cry and whine and bitch about the other side, not even trying to understand them first. And so we've got folks like, I'm going to pick on a guy, but I'm not going to mention him by name. He said something that I thought was phenomenally tone deaf. He said, would you rather, you know, there's different types of MAGAs. Okay, fine. One of them's the Trump MAGA. Another one's the Ben Shapiro MAGA. That doesn't make any sense. Ben Shapiro is a make Israel great, like guy. He's not pro-America, at least in any traditional sense that any, you know, Native American or like an American citizen would look at, because his interests are with Israel. He's very public about this. And so when we're sitting here saying that's MAGA, it's not. And when we're sitting here with these rhetorics where you say, here's a libtard, here's a maggot, here's a this, here's a that, that's the most disenfranchising thing I've seen across the board on voting. People are afraid to even have these discussions. We're coming up on Thanksgiving as the joke, right? You know, going to have those awkward conversations with the family because someone thinks one way, someone thinks another. And so I guess I think you might underestimate your own power here. I appreciate your humility, but the fact of the matter is, when you're being condescending and dismissive to people who are on the other side of the aisle, And when you're not actually engaging with understanding what's going on the other end of this aisle, you are disenfranchising voters, and you're helping encourage low information voters. You're helping encourage the single issue voters to show up just for that, because folks are so disengaged from it. So if you really do believe that all adults should have a right to vote and we should all participate, then why are you in a position where you're railing against groups like that? Do you see that as feeding into that problem?
It seems like we've shifted this from whether or not people should have the right to vote to now Ryan should be less mean. And I, you know, like I think I can be quite mean. I can be quite divisive on these panels. I would argue, frankly, that the vitriol that I'm expressing is reactive vitriol in most cases. I mean, we have a president of the United States who campaigned saying, to like protest about protesters in his crowd. We should knock the hell out of them. I'll pay for your legal bills. He talked about using the Second Amendment on on Hillary Clinton. This is an extremely divisive president. He talked about how immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. He tried to do a Muslim ban. These are all like first term things, not to even begin on the insanity of the second Trump term. I just like maybe it might be the case that Ryan's mean words online are divisive and might make Republicans feel shameful about checking a box, right? But I guess what I'd say is, yeah, maybe you should fucking feel a little ashamed. Maybe you should think about the consequences of your vote. Maybe you should be aware that sometimes you're voting for things that are killing people, that are making people's lives worse. Like again, these ACA premiums that multiple studies have found or have suggested that over the next few years are going to unnecessarily lead to the deaths of 50,000 mostly poor Americans. And I think people who have been voting for these Republicans who are doing these sorts of things, they should take a moment and think, wow, like what the fuck is going on? Why are people being so mean to me about this? And try to figure it out. I think it's actually a good thing. And like even besides all that, if we realistically, when we look at where the vitriol is coming from, the right is fucking insane. Like after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, there were Congress people even who went on Twitter and said that the Democrats are a terrorist organization. And we didn't even know who shot Charlie at that point. We didn't even know what happened. They were doxing trans people and saying that they were the one who did it. This is, I don't know, like, I mean, sure, vitriol comes from both sides. But like Republicans run the House, they run the Senate, they have the presidency, and they are not toning down the divisiveness. In fact, that's even one of the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, is pointing out right now and being called a traitor for it. So I don't know. I'm not really that worried about me being a little too mean on a YouTube panel.
I'm not sure it's within the scope anyways.
No, I mean, the point isn't whether you're mean or you're not. The fact of the matter is it's if we really do want everybody to come sit at the table, we need to make the table not a slugfest. And what I'm hearing from you also is, I mean, you're saying, well, Daddy Trump this, Daddy Trump that, Republicans this, Republicans that. It doesn't actually sound like you're viewing the Republican voter base as anything other than a monolith, right? You mentioned MTG. MTG and Thomas Massey are probably the most America First, most constitutional conservative aligned politicians we have. And there's folks that are saying, well, MAGA's having a civil war, this, that, and the other thing. Like, it seems like you hang an awful lot of argument just off of Trump. And so I guess, I hear you saying, oh, well, it's just that Josh, I'm now saying that Ryan's mean. Fine, be mean. You're just one guy on the internet. You're not the meanest guy. You're a guy that I also think is coming from the perspective of you care about people, you want them all engaged, and you think that that's what's best for society. So I believe we've covered all of the points that I set out to point here. We already agreed that not all adults have the right to vote. Ryan already has outlined at least 2 or 3 groups that have adults. And I think there's been some reasonable discussion here, and I appreciate engaging with. So if there's more you want to beat on, if there's topics that are uncovered, that's great. But I also don't feel that I need to keep pumping this conversation if we really don't have anything else to mull over here.
Ryan, I'll leave it to you. You do have the yes side of things. If you wanted to dive into more talking points, you're more than welcome to.
I mean, I think that we walked through all of Josh's proposals for groups that he thinks it would be good potentially to disenfranchise. I think I gave fairly strong reasons for each one about why that's not a very reasonable way to approach the problem. And then we steered over towards the idea that like people being mean and alienating about politics online is more disenfranchising than literally redistricting and removing like Black communities from having even the opportunity to elect representatives, which it seems kind of insane to say that that's more of disenfranchisement than literal definitional disenfranchisement through redistricting. But I'm not sure where to go from here. I'm happy to move on to closing statements and super chats or whatever.
Wow, fastest debate ever and the calmest at the same time. I'm not sure how I feel about that. All right, well then, Joshua, I will leave it to you. You are more than welcome to go ahead and kick off with your closing statement.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a starting point, the qualifier in this that Ryan agreed to was that the debate is, do all adults have the right to vote? He already said no. Felons at a minimum, while they're incarcerated, they shouldn't vote. We agreed that dead people shouldn't vote. Now that's sort of just a nod to some Republican arguments that maybe some dead voters shouldn't be voting, and Ryan agreed, so that's nice. But we also agreed that there's a handful of exceptions on that one. I'm going to say I respect Ryan. I appreciate his willingness to really double down and focusing on saying that everybody should have an equal voice at the table. I don't understand how his definition of disenfranchisement is redistricting. I think it's far more than that. Across the nation, 1 in 5 voters votes in the primary. The rest ignore it. And a lot of that's because they don't feel informed. They don't feel like their vote matters. And any type of discussion in current society is largely reduced to a shouting match. And so as long as everybody's going to scream, their favorite pejoratives and assume that anybody that's voting on another team is all part of a monolith, like I think we're going to see far more schisms and far less voter engagement than really any policy suggestion that I provided here. So, I'll say again, Ryan, thanks for being good faith on this. I do think sometimes a couple of times I got your ears a little pointy, but when I pointed to what I was trying to get at, you engage with it, and appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, so I'll agree that I agreed that felons, dead people, illegal immigrants, I think those 3 groups are not included necessarily in my all adults should vote. I even gave examples where illegal immigrants potentially could be included in some cases, and felons, I actually am open to reform there. And I specifically pointed to how like that specific policy is rooted in white supremacy and was designed based on the people who wrote it, their own words, was specifically targeting Black men and crimes that they perceived Black men to be more likely to do. This at the very least is a policy that we should be examining with that context in mind. I just want to remind everyone that the debate was inspired by the prompt "Women shouldn't vote," and I didn't want to engage on that prompt specifically because, frankly, I didn't want my face on a thumbnail that said "Women shouldn't vote" under it, just for my own personal values. But I don't want to let Josh off the hook there, because he's saying, "Oh, Ryan yielded about felons." We had a conversation on this very panel just the other day where I already pointed out that like we're probably not including felons in this conversation. Josh agreed that wasn't the issue. So if that's going to be his win condition, that's I just don't think it's a very strong footing for him. You mentioned how you find it weird that I'm saying redistricting can be disenfranchisement. I'm not saying that all disenfranchisement is done through redistricting. I'm saying that one specific example of disenfranchisement is happening right now through redistricting. We could even say that California has embraced some form of disenfranchisement in their response to the Texas gerrymandering by doing their own. But I think one key difference is that the people in California voted for that change, while in Texas it was asked for by the President of the United States. Another thing we talked about is the low turnout for voting. I think this is a big problem. I want to get more people involved with politics. I think that's a good thing. I want more people to want to learn about politics. I think that's a good thing. I think oftentimes, sometimes some heated discussions can actually bring people to the table. Sometimes they do push them away, which is why I think it's good to have platforms that include both things. If we want to get more voter turnout, which I'm totally in favor of, I think one of the best ways to do that might be something like a tax credit for individuals who vote. Like, why not? Like, why not reward people for voting? I know Australia has like some like punishment for not voting. I'm not really in favor of that because I think it's important that we give people access to like a protest vote. But I'm certainly happy to incentivize people to vote because I think that most Americans should vote. And I want to know what they want to happen in our country. I think it's valuable as a democracy that I'm proud to live in.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Ladies and gentlemen, I have dropped the open panel link in the chat. It is pinned at the top, or I will also continue dropping it as well. I had a thought, Joshua. Did you know that over 60% of men who were drafted during the Vietnam War didn't show up? They were able to either waiver out, they evaded it, they emigrated, all sorts of fun stuff. Over 60%. Do you find that, and this is kind of to the talking point of women shouldn't vote because they can't be drafted to war. But 60% of men who were drafted in the 60s didn't even, they found their exit source and they would have had the opportunity to vote all prior to that and then still didn't show up when they were supposed to.
I mean, I don't know what was kind of disappointing is it would have been interesting to see Ryan engage, or you're welcome to as well, anyone is, with how do we account for this? So for example, as an oversimplification, I think maybe there's a bifurcation of vote for war, for example, or I don't know. Now, what I would say is whatever that 60% is, that's a different issue. Both my grandfathers served in combat. My grandfather served in the Korean War as a Marine on my mother's side. On my father's side, my grandfather served as a cook in the Navy in World War II. My bloodlines survived combat. I think that having the opportunity to serve to defend your country is an honor and a duty, and I think that's exciting. And anybody that think that was running away from that, I think they're cowards. And I don't think their cowardism is an excuse to ignore the rest of the equation. So if there's a way to balance it out, I'm curious. Some of the arguments that I've heard on this are, one, well, we should just abolish the draft, and okay, that's kind of interesting. Well, then we just all say nobody goes to war, and then no one has. Okay, that's, I think, an oversimplification. And then the other side of that is, well, then women should enlist as well. The fact of the matter is they're not able to equally contribute. Now, I will say I'm uncomfortable with the idea of categorically saying across the board women shouldn't vote, but I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that, you know, the more than half the country can vote for war when they're not going to have to fight in it. And I haven't heard a resolution on that one.
We have had women in war situations. We have had women who have died during combat. Maybe they weren't in direct combat, but they have still died due to being, you know, in Iraq or wherever, and so on and so forth. But I would even be totally pro draft women because all of those support a heavy hand, and I was in the military, but a heavy hand of military is all support, admin, logistics, all the behind the scenes stuff, so on and so forth. And I think women have already been in those supportive roles to begin with. World War II, we saw a lot of that, running the operating rooms and the nurses and so on. And like we saw a lot of women who volunteered to go and aid in that. And I would be totally pro draft women, even if the caveat is they can only be in a supportive role in order to allow the men to maneuver into direct combat roles. But the bigger question is do you actually want women in the draft to go to war? Because even though those men might go overseas and fight and do their thing, we're going to lose a lot of people. We're going to lose a lot of men, which means we need to repopulate. We can't repopulate if our women are out there fighting hand to hand or, you know, front lines combat as well. So the real question is, do you want to send women to frontline combat, or do you want to propose women be drafted too, along with admin features or supportive caveats, that little asterisk, you know, at the end of it, or keep them where we are right now? The draft sits where it is. The chances of being drafted are really slim. If you look it up online, it actually says like 0.0000 the chances of us having a draft, we would require a lot of very specific features to even push us into that kind of battle zone. At this point, day and age, we have so much technology, drones, nuke systems, backdoor, secret people doing things behind the scenes, that the chances of hand to hand or the need for it are even slimmer. So even more so, like your chance, even my son's chance of going to war is so slim to none. It's almost ridiculous, right? So just the mere idea that you have to sign up for it. As I said earlier, you have a 60% based on the last draft. 60% of you are probably not even going to go anyways. You know, you can tap out if you're in college, if your family doesn't have enough money to support itself. You can emigrate, you can leave the country, go somewhere else. Like you still have options to avoid going to war, or if you're medically not well, and that could be something as simple as I have asthma, so I can't go, or that's something as simple as bone spurs, I have ADHD, you know, mental illness of any sorts. All of these could be ways to tap out, which, you know, again, you might have to sign up, but your chances of actually going, like I said, 60% of them tapped out. That's a lot. That's a lot. It was over 15 million men were able to tap out of actually, or was it 15? I think that was the number I saw. But I know for sure 300,000 of them evaded completely illegally and just ran away. So even more so, that's why I say, like, is it that vital for women to be tacked onto the draft in order for us to have a vote? Or if you give me something more substantial, like, okay, if we say you can only vote if you own land, if you have like invested properties here, or if you have, you know, certain things that you like, certain qualities and features that you have to have that do show and declare a stake in the game, which I think it's over 50% of women actually do own property in America and do have very large stakes. And they are the ones that produce the children for you, whether the father is still there or not. So I think if that's the instance, women are higher stakeholders than men are in that instance. Even if you get called off to a draft, we are the ones that are here to ensure the future is still being birthed and reproduced in that essence. That's my thought. Not that I say all women should vote, but I would say I wouldn't want to limit any because of something as simple as, oh, well, you can't go to war.
Well, so there's a lot you threw on there. I'll pick at some of it. I might have missed some. The fact of the matter is, in 2025, there are old men getting drafted in the Ukraine. We've got a draft under martial law, men ages 18 to 60. So if we want to limit it to the US, your numbers hold up. If we're looking at how things look across the board, fact of the matter is you do have old guys getting drafted. I think just fundamentally, so there's a local startup in Las Vegas. They've got some gym equipment where it's not you lift weights, it's you push on a bar and it gives you a measurement of how hard you're pushing. Fundamentally, and this is just I'm just looking at these as the facts. I don't like where it leads, but these are the facts. For example, right at 40, I've got more upper body strength as a semi-old man, middle-aged man, than a woman would in her prime. Just if we're just talking raw horsepower there. The other thing is when you're taking, and so I think putting women on the front lines is a crazy. I think it's actually, it would make us weaker. Right. I don't think that contributing in support is the same, but it is contributing. And so if we're looking for, let's say the current situation doesn't sit well, that's getting us closer to it. The other statistic about women in the military that I find very uncomfortable, and if anyone wants to fact check it, go for it. There's about 21 veteran suicides a day. At least that's the number that was punched around a while. The number that is very surprising to me is the percentage of those that are women, and it's virtually all of them. It's like 18 of them. And so I've got a friend that served in the Navy. She was SA'd a couple of times in the Navy, and she ended up going on disability, and it was a very horrific situation for her. We have a lot of SA in the military, and a lot of that is not good for anyone. And so while I'm saying, you know, if we say everybody's eligible for the draft, would that be an improvement? Would that be more equitable? 100%. I would like to see that. Things as they are right now, if we're saying we're keeping everything right where it's at, that would balance the field a bit. And the fact of the matter is, if we're talking about incentives, right now, if they're voting to war and they might be involved in it, right, I suspect more women involved in support roles lost their lives than women sitting at home. And so I do think that would find more equal ground. And to be honest, I'm not looking for equality. I'm a big believer in patriarchy, a big believer that men should take care of women and children. And so I'm okay with the idea that the military is primarily the responsibility of the men to go out and do that, which men have been essentially genetically engineered to do over time. That's what we've done. We live in modern times where we have these modern luxuries of drones and nukes and all this other stuff. So how much you can fit on your back and how hard you can punch doesn't matter as much, but it does still matter. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, I am uncomfortable again with the idea of saying to roughly half the voter base, you can't vote anymore. But I do see these inequalities. I do see these incentives misaligned. And I think that the conclusion isn't we should have less people voting, but we do need the reason I bring that up is we should be doing something to try to reconcile some of this. If the primary victim of war is men, but they're able to get voted into it and half the voter base doesn't have any immediate skin in the game on that one, I don't think there's equal incentive on that. So that's and thank you for your service. Any woman that hops in the military, anybody that wants to fly that flag and say, I'm going to fight and defend this, I'm here for it. It's a beautiful country. I'm here for it. It's just, right. How do we reconcile some of this?
Yes, just a quick, because I was curious about that, the suicide stats, and it seems like male veterans die from that option about 2.5 to 3 times as often as women veterans. So I think almost all of them are women. Claim is not supported by the data.
Are you? And I hate to do this to you, but are you doing that per capita? Because there's an overwhelming majority.
So I started first. Yeah, so with the adjustment, that's where the 2.5 to 3 came from, is when it's per capita.
Okay, well, I appreciate you looking that up, and the penalty for you doing my fact checking is I have to admit I was wrong. Thank you for doing my fact checking. I was wrong.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I hear you on it, and I agree. I don't think women in the military is always the best thing, but if you're going to prevent us from being able to do something, right? And then that in turn prevents us to be able to do something else. It's like, well, okay, but that's not my fault, right? Like you're telling me I don't have the strength to be on the front line. Okay, fine, but that doesn't mean that I don't want the opportunity to try, right? I mean, realistically, yes, I know most men are way more stronger than women, but if I'm saying, well, fine, give me an opportunity to do something else. I want to help. I want to do something. I'm willing to help, right? And especially if it requires me being able to obtain a vote, right? Like at least let me do it. And
that's also, actual, if I may, that's showing actual engagement in it, and that's what's really solving the problem. Is that's actual engagement, saying I love this country, I'm going to participate in it, I want to stay. Great. I don't care if we agree on things. If that's how you feel about your country and that's how you're engaging, you should participate in the process. That's who it's for.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to add, with regards to Ukraine, or as you put it, the Ukraine, I think there's a very particular situation going on there, right, where they're being invaded by Russia. And I mean, I can imagine, I guess, a situation logically, it's possible the United States could be invaded in such a way. And I don't know, like I know a lot of women in my life who are quite capable with firearms, served in the military, etc. I mean, my parents met in the Navy. And now I don't want my mom certainly on the front lines, especially not as an older woman. But like, I mean, I think there are tons of women who would be out in the streets supporting us, firing down at whatever Chinaman or whoever it is who is who's invading our streets. Like I wouldn't want the women to sit on the wayside necessarily if it meant we would be losing the war. I think they would stand alongside me and fight for our freedom.
Yeah, I think we can't just rule that. And a lot of stuff you were talking about, and I understand where you were going with it, like the minority concept and so on and so forth. But I think I want to be mindful to say that if you're going to make a very strong statement, there shouldn't be a whole lot of subjectivity to it, right? So, for instance, the schizophrenia, right, or somebody with a mental illness. Like to what degree, to how much of this, to how much of that, it's too subjective, and that would require even more regulation than what we would probably even have the manpower to regulate. I mean, even look at being able to purchase a weapon and how hard but how easy that is, all in the same breath, right? And the idea that somebody has a mental illness or something, and can we track it, and so on and so forth. But even more so, I think like the old people claim, the senior citizens and their ability to vote for Medicaid, Medicare, whatever, Social Security, and they're part of a minority group. Yes, but they've earned that right. They've earned that right to continue voting in America. They've paid their taxes. They've paid their dues. It's time for them to be able to relax. But also with that stringent is their legacy, their grandchildren. They still have properties. They still pay taxes into the system. They're still like doing their civic duty to whatever degree that is. I don't think you can hardline that and be like, okay, well, once you pass the age of 75, like we don't want to know what you have to say anymore, right? Even though you're the most experienced people here. You have the wisdom of how many generations, and you've created even more generations, and you want nothing more but the best for your children. And I think that their vote should count even more in terms of the value of wisdom and experience and knowledge. They've been through, they're 75 years old. That's a lot of different American history that they've seen and come through. And I have a strong value in that. So I don't know if we want to like chastise that all the way and be like, yeah, you're just old.
Well, here's the thing on that. There's a very easy solution, and it's Ryan stops being mean. But it's not just Ryan stops being mean, it's everyone stops being mean. And I mean this on every side imaginable. I don't believe in the two-party left, right, whatever. I believe everybody. And I explain this, I say this because if 80% of people aren't voting, that means the old people, their children and grandchildren aren't participating. That's what should be balancing it out. If we were having voter engagement from 18 on up, we would have a nice spread. But unfortunately, the vote is largely younger voters aren't participating, and so it skews heavy. So the solution really, I think, is what Ryan would like is more voter engagement, more voter education, more all of this.
But
and so I think,
sorry, go ahead. I think, do you want people to vote who don't even care to go vote? Do you want them engaging in something that they actually don't care to do? Right? Like I look at it just the same as, for instance, if you help a friend out and you hook them up with an interview for a job and you're like, bro, all right, I got you set up. This person said just to email them and they'd love to talk to you, so on and so forth. And your friend never emails that person. They never go and engage with it. And it was like the perfect opportunity for them. And they just didn't even go through with it. Like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make a drink. But if your friend doesn't even go out of their way to email that person to get the interview set up, do you want them even taking on that interview anyways? Right? Like the same with people who are too lazy to vote or don't care enough to vote or don't want to vote or don't like the government system. Do you want those people really going and casting their opinion out if they're not willing to take the time to educate themselves? They don't care enough about the voting system to do it. They don't care enough about America to be willing to cast their opinion to it. They don't care enough about the left, right talking points or what's important. I like, do you want them voting if they don't care enough to even get up and go?
Well, so there's sort of two pieces of this, right? I'm a systems engineer at my heart. I say, figure out what the thing is. And if I want a different outcome, how do I engineer to that solution? Mm-hmm. I think the problem is we have massive disengagement from voters. And there's a lot of good angles about that being a problem. I don't want people who aren't engaged to participate. I want everyone to be engaged. And so if you take a look at why people aren't engaged, it's divisive rhetoric. It's feeling like their vote doesn't matter. It's feeling like a lot of the reason, and I hope this message gets heard loud and clear across all of the liberal internet dim. Not that it's, we'll see how far it goes, but a lot of conservatives are pissed at Trump. The idea that you're saying, well, you guys voted for Trump, most of us are pissed about that. No one really liked him. He was a Democrat for a long time before he ended up flipping over. And it's not even, look, I don't mind a Democrat. I don't mind a libertarian. I do mind a flat earther. They make a point once in a while. It's only on accident. But when we're thinking about actual voter engagement, right? If we're thinking Athenian democracy, everybody gets a voice. The question is, why are they not engaged? And I think that that's a broader discussion. But again, if you don't think your vote matters, if you're tired, you don't want to be involved with something because it's just people shrieking at each other. And here's the other thing. And Ryan, you're going to like this one, I think. If people are working so damn hard just to make ends meet that they're so sprawled out that they can't spare the bandwidth to deal with it, that's a problem too. We need to make sure that the voting base actually can participate. If they're too busy stuck in a rat race, like they can't meaningfully engage. Ryan, would you agree with me on that one?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that people who are struggling to get by day to day, they are less likely to engage with the political process because they're making sure they're worrying about like how they're going to feed their kids and pay for their health care and stuff. Obviously, yeah, of course, I agree with that. I also agree with another point you made about feeling like people feeling like their vote doesn't matter. And I thought it was interesting you brought that up because earlier you were pointing to my vitriol or in the vitriol by and large as like one example of something that pushes people away from political involvement. But something you did tonight was you push on this idea that this election must have been influenced in some shady way, because why would people vote for this thing that you thought would be insane for them to vote for? So you're kind of pushing this narrative that the voting is rigged, right? And that you were suggesting that the voting perhaps is not fair and people aren't being represented. Well, I think that if what's the phrase, too big to rig? I think if more people were engaged, more people were voting, it might be harder for that to even make those claims in the first place. But I also think that like pushing those narratives without really strong evidence and kind of convincing people that like their votes don't matter in the first place, I think that's another form of mild disenfranchisement that we should be engaging with. And I mean, I think that the Republicans and Trump specifically, with all the lies about the 2020 election, I think they did a number on trust in our institutions, and now they're doing a number on trust in those institutions in a different way by making those institutions even less trustworthy than they ever were. But that's a whole different conversation.
We would both agree that voting should be transparent and accurately counted, and we should follow it right. So here's Ryan. Here's a specific challenge to you. At least anytime you're talking to me, if you think that there's treachery on one side and it's on the other side as well, I think we should be at no treachery. There's no party that's immune. There's no group that we can say, well, they can cheat and the other side can't. So all that just to say, I wouldn't be happy if I mean, the other thing is there is a lot of proof on this. I'm just not ready for that. I didn't prep for this. If you want examples of ballot stuffing, if you want all this other stuff, there is proof. But a part of the problem, going back to the misinformation, disinformation, all of that, is there's just this deluge of filth everywhere. So for anybody trying to actually parse through it, it becomes a fool's errand. And I think that's driving some disengagement, surely.
Yeah, I'll move to the questions and maybe the panel. I just wanted to engage with you on those, Joshua, just because I heard some things and I'm like, But I'll go ahead and move to the questions. Welcome, Jen, with your new membership, darling. We love having you here. Neo Starling sending in the maters just to say hello to everyone. Tom says, how idiotic to say old people have no stake. They have kids, friends, love of country, but I'm given my whole life to the country. Now I'm so old, so I shouldn't have a say. Only word for this view is idiotic. And Joshua, I believe that's to you.
Oh, I mean, there's an oversimplification there, and maybe we'll bait Tom into doing more and more donations to clarify. But it's you should have the same vote. Like the real prescription, right? Josh is king for a day. He gets to win the hearts and minds. It's not just he's a tyrant, but we actually win people over on things. Is their children and grandchildren should vote as well. The problem fundamentally, to point to a specific iceberg, is Social Security and Medicare are both, they're going to hit, and it's going to be real ugly, and it's going to be a bloodbath. And if the older voters really gave a shit about their kids and their grandkids, they wouldn't be voting this way. And so the ideal is the kids and the grandkids are voting and participating. We're getting a balanced and even perspective on it. But the other thing is, my argument wasn't that the old people have no stake. It's that they have less of a stake. They have less of their lifetime to be here. And more importantly, the consequences for what they're doing will not be visited on their own heads. So no matter how much they love their children, their grandchildren, the world behind them, it's just not an actual penalty they'll be paying the price for.
But you are voting, you're taking it from as if they were only voting in one direction. But if you're saying, well, if they vote this way, it's in their disinterest, but you're removing their option to vote the other way altogether.
Historically, any politician that even mentions the problems that we have with those programs is not going to win an election. Maybe it's a flaw in the way our election process works, but that is a radioactive topic for anyone to talk. This has been documented at least for 20 years. And this is a problem that just keeps compounding and getting bigger. A lot of the national debt is to those programs. And I'm not saying we shouldn't fund them, but fundamentally, it's just as simple as that group. And it's a rolling target. It's not just the old people today, but take your 75-year-old voter 20 years ago. they're not here anymore. And they voted part of their vote was to keep things going as the status quo, even though it's going to blow up later. So if we take a look at just make it easy, the last 20 years of voting data, they're not voting in the interest of their children and grandchildren.
But they're voting. You're saying that they're only voting one way, but you're claiming that in order to prevent them from voting one direction, you want to remove their vote altogether, but that's still their vote.
Also, I want to add for 1 second, like I think the suggestion that they're not voting in the interest of their grandchildren, their children, etc., like, and their communities, I don't know this is true. I think they might perceive that that's what they're doing. I think a lot of old people believe that they are voting for what's they believe is best for the country, best for their family, best for their kids. I don't think this is substantiated just because, you know, I'll yield that, like, there are funding issues with Medicare and with Social Security. These are problems, but it feels like the solution isn't disenfranchising the people who depend on these things. It's finding a better way to fund them. You know, maybe we can look at the billionaires who are paying a very tiny percentage of their income compared to what they could be providing. That might be one way to deal with this. And I wish more old people were on board with that, but, you know.
Well, let me poke you in the ribs on this one, Ryan. Let's say your worldview is right, and I'm another mind open to being changed here. If you'll agree with me for the sake of argument, you know, I can fact check this and everything, that Social Security and Medicare are collapsing and have been collapsing for the last 20 years. They're not voting for their posterity. They're not engaging with that. And so would you, if I think we'd agree it'd be better if the posterity was voting and participating as well, but all evidence indicates they're voting for, we don't care if our children have health care in retirement or if they have Social Security income. And so they're saying, I'm going to bury my head in the sand on this issue. And this has been an issue for 20 years or more. So how do we reconcile that?
I mean, it's a good question. I'll yield that. In fact, I do believe there are funding issues that are downstream of the reality of, like, how we handle Medicare and Social Security. I agree with that, but maybe the word collapsing and the disaster. These are things that I'm not quite as sold on. That these are so impending, or these are, you know, we're just a few years away from disaster. I just don't buy that. But, like, I mean, again, like, these are hard conversations and hard policy decisions. They're gonna have to be made at some point as we face consequences. And I mean, just saying that because people vote to make sure that they have the means to survive means that they're not also voting for having a country that their children can also thrive in. I don't see these things as inherently mutually exclusive. I think that there are probably solutions that, you know, just because I can't come up with them on the fly right now. I'm not a lawmaker, you know. Maybe we should start looking at what people who are our lawmakers are proposing with regards to this, and see if we
real quick. Are you a U.S. citizen?
Damn right I am.
If you run for any office, I'll be happy to help you.
I won't do it, but I appreciate that.
Right. I don't care what side people are on. I care about people that actually care about the populace. I dropped in chat also a Time article. I don't know which media you find acceptable and authoritative or not.
It's fine.
But it's something to actually dig into on it. And I think that, again, this goes back to the vitriol and the rhetoric. I think if we could have sat down collectively as a society 20 years ago and had a discussion about this in a sensible way, you know, what your retirement, what my retirement, what Sarah's retirement is going to look like, that'd be a lot better. And so that's a part of why, again, I was excited to have this conversation with you, because I do think more than many, you can be engaged with reasonably, and I appreciate you meeting me there on that one.
Fair enough. Dwight asks, what do panelists think is correct minimal age to vote, and how did you come up with said age?
I guess personally, I think we got to start somewhere, and I think it's reasonable to associate it with, like, the age that people become adults. But personally, I'm open to like some sort of like I've actually talked about this on this panel before, like allowing 17-year-olds to vote potentially. And when I brought that up, I think to Andrew Wilson was on here, and he said that, oh, well, wouldn't you have to also lower the age of consent or something, which is an absolutely bizarre and ridiculous conclusion to draw from that. Those are not the same thing at all. But I think that getting people to vote early when they are perhaps have more time to do so, when they're not like just gone off to college, and they're like still involved in their home, they're still probably talking about politics with their family, they're still probably taking civics classes in high school, for example. If they vote for the first time at that point, they are more likely to vote in the next election. Voting is something that once you start doing it, you're more likely to do it in the future. And it seems that 18 is perhaps possibly one of the worst times to start voting, just because of all the things that are going on. People are less likely to vote when they're 18. So I'm actually open to expanding that. And a lot of 17-year-olds work jobs, pay taxes, etc. I don't know. I'm not opposed to allowing that. So I don't know. We see, how did I come up with it? It's going to be arbitrary at the end of the day. We have to pick something, and
doesn't have to be arbitrary. I'll live with 18. Anything any lower, I can't live with. I would be fine with going all the way to 25 under the argument people are familiar with, which is when the brain develops. Democrats in California, I believe, have lobbied for going as low as 16, and I think the answer is generally a lot of folks, younger people are generally an easier voter base to manipulate. And so that's the concern that I would have. There's a lot of folks that have ideas in their younger years that later on they become disabused of. And so I don't know that going to 17, 17 is not a huge leap. I don't know, going like 16, 15, 14, we go down. Yeah. I agree with you, Ryan. The mirroring that with the age of consent, I think, is weird, real weird. But I think 18 is fine. And I think that should be, if we say you're an adult at 18, then you can vote, you can have a gun, you can drink a beer. Like, those are all part of the same group to me. So if we're saying 18, I think that's a fine line. I wouldn't want it any younger. And again, the argument for 25 would be that's when basically we're better at reasoning, and any younger and we're more manipulatable.
I would just add one thing. I actually agree that you're probably more manipulatable at 17, 16, etc. But I think the people who are most likely to be manipulating you to vote in a certain way at that age are probably going to be your family. People tend to register to vote with the political party of their parents. And I think so they're probably also going to go to the voting booth with their parents. They're going to be listening to their parents talk about politics. They're probably going to vote alongside their parents, more so than just AOC or someone who they saw tweeting. Although I guess it's possible to sway them as well. But the idea is not about getting them to vote a specific way as much as getting them started in the habit of voting so that they continue to be an engaged member of society in their older age.
That makes sense.
I think the youngsters are very manipulatable. Juul, they did a massive campaign with their vaping with targeting teenagers. And now we've got a whole generation of kids that are addicted to nicotine. If Ryan's argument is that kids are going to do what their parents say when they're teenagers, I think that one's a little odd, but maybe I'm less in touch with the kids these days. But I also think, engage in the process and understanding it's really important. Like if we had better civics education in high school, I think if we did the education ahead of it, I think we could go a little lower. Maybe. I still don't like it, but the manipulation machine is what I'm afraid of, not whatever their parents are going to say or do.
Fair enough. Welcome, Mr. Muckster, for your membership here. Tom Carpenter sending the war tax for the Mater Nation. Thank you so kindly. Appreciate you. Tom also says, and there's the point. When you have various criteria filters, who sets the criteria? If Ryan does it, Joshua would be filtered out and vice versa. Don't thinking we want that.
I would like to say, to be clear, I would not disenfranchise Josh. I would not disenfranchise Republicans in general. In fact, I want to give them health care. I want them to have the right to vote. I want them to have health care. I want them to have welfare and all these programs that those red rural states largely depend on. So I'm not that guy, but I agree with the sentiment that like as we start putting these filters up, people are often of the perception that they are not going to be a victim of those filters until they are.
Well, and I'm going to join arms with Ryan here. We're working on singing Kumbaya together better. I wouldn't want him disenfranchised. I like the fact that he cares and he's engaged. We can arrive at a wide variety of different opinions. He's even corrected me on stats, and I'm fine with that. I believe that there is empirical truth out there, and in reasoned discussion, we can have that come out. I do wish he'd stop being mean, and it's not just because it's a character flaw and I'm saying Ryan's a bad guy. I think Ryan's a good guy. Ryan's going out on the internet. He's saying his piece. He's getting people engaged. He's talking about things. He's not just ranting and screeding. He's actually saying, well, this is where I come to this. And he does have a little bit of this wanting to be Santa and give everybody health care, and we haven't figured out the economics on that, and that's sort of where I start having a problem. But fundamentally, I don't think it's about filtering people out as much as it is making sure that the system's accurately reflecting. I mean, we've got an educated voter base that is making good policy for the long-term health of the country, and in ensuring individual rights, which is a nightmare to dance those two. But that's where I end up on it.
I just want to add: shut up, Four Eyes. Enjoy your health insurance.
I got taxed for it.
Alexander says, by Joshua's standard, men shouldn't be allowed to vote on abortion since the people who die in childbirth are 100% women. Seems like a crap system. By that standard, only elderly get to vote on Social Security.
I mean, that's a logically incoherent thing to say. The fact of the matter is, now there's this idea that women, children are the property of women. That's roughly how U.S. law has been set out. That's roughly how the family courts work. Fact of the matter is, the child is 50% the father's DNA. And women are given complete control over whether or not, I mean, here's what's really stupid about this, Alex. What's really stupid about the thing that you said, and I'm trying to be nice, but you've really hit on a nerve here, and it deserves to be called out for stupid. Women exclusively get to decide if they want to kill the kid or not. Exclusively. There's no say that the men have. So even though we can vote, we get no say in that.
Well, I think that the axis he's kind of taking here is more about your idea that, like, you know, men are the ones who die in the wars. So those people are the most impacted by that. And similarly, women are the most impacted by abortion restrictions because they are the ones, I believe men and women are different. I think women have wombs. Children grow in wombs, so that's the basis by which I believe abortion should be legal, because these people are obligated to grow that child in their womb, and they should have the opportunity to end that process if they choose. But I think, I mean, what he's arguing, it seems logically coherent with, if you're by your standard that if men are the ones who are primarily affected by war, that men should be the ones who should vote for whether or not we go to war. And he's saying women are the ones primarily affected by pregnancy and abortion. And so by that standard, women should be the ones who vote on that issue, or by only elderly people would vote on Social Security. I don't think it's incoherent. I think it's kind of logically sound, actually.
No, it's an oversimplification, and it starts by mischaracterizing what I said. The fact of the matter is, I didn't say because men are the only people that die in war that they should be the only ones to vote in war. I pointed to a concern. I didn't necessarily. So again, I'm saying I don't think that's fair and reasonable, and there should be an accommodation for that. Mr. Rin or whatever it is saying flat out that there should be no allowing for the vote. I wasn't even going that far with it. So he's not flipping my argument. He's reinventing it.
Well, I mean, even at that, parents should be the only ones who vote on educational programs. I mean, you could. I see what you're saying by the draft concept, like, but you know, that's because of the caveat that only men go to war and die, right? So then it's like, okay, well, then parents are the only ones who have any children in the education system, so therefore, only parents should be able to vote on.
Did we lose just Sarah? Okay, good. It's not me. It's not my fault. That's good.
No, I was doing my head bob. You were doing your head bob.
Yeah. We formed a mutiny here. We've taken over Sarah's channel. So
I didn't say only men die. People love putting words into my mouth I didn't say, so that way they can make the argument. It's not exclusively men. It's women too. And the other thing is to jump on what Sarah's saying. Like, I'm surprised this didn't come up in our chat, but it did here now. I find voting for the school board, for example, I don't have any kids that go to the school district. I do pay a school tax, but why the hell should I have a say in who gets elected there or who's involved? Because I don't have actually any skin in the game. And I think it might even be more interesting to say per student, you get 1 vote per kid, right? You got 10 kids, you get 10 votes. I don't know. And I do think that a part of what might be more useful than these massive votes where everybody in a state votes on a couple of issues. These smaller ones, and Ryan, I think you were probably leaning towards this with the illegal immigrants. My starting point is if they're an illegal immigrant, they should leave. But ignoring that argument, just setting that to the side, if people are living in a community and they're picking trash day, the people in that community should be picking what the trash day is, because it doesn't matter to anyone else. I didn't hear you if you said that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was thanking Mackenzie for the gifted membership in my chat. But
thank you, Mackenzie, for the gifted membership in Ryan's chat.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's skip to the next super chat. Oh wait, we can't.
Yeah. Well, we have we technically, if you click the starred section of the side chat, we can actually see.
Wow! I'm seeing all of this stuff here. Oh my goodness, starred. So okay. Yes, Muckster, Tom. What's the criteria? Okay.
I think the next one would be.
I am supreme leader.
Yeah. So Kokomo becomes supreme leader. Thank you, Kokomo.
All right. I'd like to hear his platform. I'd like to hear his platform.
Yeah,
I
sure.
like the donation. I think only women and what the.
Tom says only women. And, Tom Carpenter for $9.99 says, I think only women and bald men should be allowed to vote. Perhaps I should shave my head then, if that's the only way. And thank you, Michelle, for that $2 as well.
I am way overdue for a haircut, and I don't think I'd go all the way to bald, but to vote maybe. All right, Jason Reeves, $4.99. I honestly think that only I like this guy. I honestly think that only property owners should vote because it's easy to vote and spend others' money. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you a question about this one, but develop a little bit, with your consent, of course.
My consent.
So there is a problem with saying the people that aren't putting money into the pot get to make the vote. Now, full disclosure, I've done pretty well for myself at different stages of my career. The first year I did really well. I had to write the IRS a check for $53,742. And that hurt. Because my first job was making $4.75 an hour, and I'd taken a lot of risk and worked really hard to get there. So my question she's back. We kept going through the super chats without you. See how collaborative we are? He even helped me. But yeah, so I mean, how do you make sense of the folks that aren't paying for it? And I get everybody, like there's a conflict there. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, everyone is impacted by what goes on in a local community, right? Like people are impacted by all the policies. People are, they are subject to the laws. They can be arrested, detained, perhaps forced to be pregnant. They can, like, there are so many different things. Like we can talk about how there might be particular things that they aren't as directly affected by. But I mean, that doesn't seem to be how we approach decision making in our democracy. We would have to do some pretty radical reform to try to get I'm just imagining all the infrastructure to determine just how directly people are affected by every single policy that we could vote on. I mean, it might be interesting data to explore, but I don't know if we should start evaluating just how much of a vote people have over specific things because of that. I'm just not sure it's practical or even desirable.
Well, part of the problem though is, let's say you have and this is a complete vacuum example, just going to illustrate the point. Let's say you have a town where there's 10 people who own homes and there's 90 homeless people. Everybody gets an equal vote. Everybody gets together, they vote, and they say, should we redistribute property? And then the homeless people go 100%. And then the people that have their homes say no, and just assume they're paid off, it's their property. Right. There's a fracture there where basically through the vote, the property owners are getting mugged. So do you have any thoughts on how to mitigate that? Do you at least acknowledge it might be a bit of a problem? I agree we shouldn't have kings and serfs, but
yeah, I mean, if we have a situation where 90% of the population in an area is homeless, that sounds like a policy failure to me in the first place. And perhaps we should hear these people's concerns, and they should be able to vote for specific policies that might impact their likelihood of becoming homeless in the first place. It sounds like a policy failure, not like a moral failing on those people. So I don't view it as necessarily mugging that they would have a voice over what goes on in that area, because again, they reached the point of being homeless somehow. I guess if we're suggesting they all decided to be homeless, they're all laying around all day, playing video games or on whatever TVs and video game consoles have been thrown out by the 10% that are they're trying to vote alongside. I guess it's like logically possible. I can imagine a situation where it's kind of weird for those people to have a voice, but yeah, in reality, I view this kind of severe disproportionate poverty as a policy failure, and it's important to hear these people's concerns and why they're in that situation in the first place. And again, that like voting is one way to manage that.
I think you're very consistent in your worldview. I admire that about you. I don't agree, obviously, but I do think you're consistent, and it's nice when people are consistent.
Kokomo says, no one gets
Sarah,
to
wrong
vote.
mic, I think.
Oh, thank you. Oh shit, my thing went out.
We've been going through the chats while you were gone, stepping up.
Oh yeah, we read that one, and but we can keep moving through. But we read up until Jason Reeves. We were talking about Jason Reeves' $4.99 one just now, with the property owners. But you should still run through them a little bit. But we don't have to cover that ground again. In fact, I can go pee while you do that.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, my mic is warming back up. I apologize. The power went out earlier today twice, and I didn't even think to give the warning. Let me see. I might should be able to.
Is that coming in better?
That's much better.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for letting me know. Kokomo says, no one gets to vote. I will be supreme leader indefinitely. Absolutely. And Tom says, I think only women and bald men should be allowed to vote. Yes, Tom, I concur. I think that would be the best. And this is where you left off here on Jason, or?
Yeah, we were just talking about that one.
Okay, I honestly think only property owners should vote because it's too easy to vote to spend others' money. I can concur with that. If somebody came out and said, and I know you guys had already gone through this conversation, but I could agree that if somebody came and said only property owners be allowed to vote, I am all for it. I would put my stamp of approval on it, because then you do have a vested interest in your property, your land, a piece of the pie, and you're here, right? And you're showing that with your actions. So I would totally put a seal of approval on that. And of course, Jason puts my second favorite color up on the screen with the big 50. Can I get tomatoes in the chat from everyone to say thank you, Jason, for completing the goal? Much love to you. I'm sure Mama's going to be getting in the chat soon, Jason, so you'll be able to have fun. And Eli Nix is backstage, one of Mama's favorites too. So somebody needs to call out Mama. Alexander says, that was your concern. My apologies. Your argument was about who should be excluded from the vote. And I get you're not saying no now, but based on your argument, this is the conclusion. And I believe this was referring to standard here.
Yeah, and this is a part of why I like these discussions, is you can engage with it. Sometimes, our brains are really funny. For a couple of years, I worked as a private investigator, and I always took notes, and our minds just remember things horrible. The worst type of testimony you can get is eyewitness. So in a discussion like this, I really like re-engaging and making sure that we're on the same page about things. I really try to not misunderstand anybody, but Mr. Wren, thank you for catching up on that one. It's nice to be acknowledged for what I said and not what you thought I said.
Love, 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 love all the way around. Okay, I've got a full panel backstage, or not full panel, but I've got a panel backstage ready to come and play. Gentlemen, let's have some fun. All right. Oh. Thank you so much to the gentlemen for jumping on the panel. And I do apologize for holding you back there hostage for quite a while. I, of course, had my own thoughts to hand over to Joshua and Ryan and then of course the super chats, and I did lose track of time. But I have set off the gauntlet. If you're watching over on the tomato side, start making your way over to the gauntlet. Otherwise, I'm going to get ready to set up the raid here shortly, and we're going to all head over there. And I'll go ahead and ask this next question that came up. UPS fund to keep your roadcaster powered up with the power outages. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have strong winds going on right now, and it just, thank God I live on a good grid, because it just goes out for a second and comes back on. But I'm sure the neighbors across the street are actually still powerless for some weird reason. But Eli, I've missed you so much. And I'm so grateful that you've been able to finally make your way back to the panel, to your home, your favorite home to be, the place you claim is your channel. And since it is your channel, sir, I would like you to go ahead and dive in with your first thoughts to the panel.
Sure. Well, as far as the prompt goes, do adults have the right to vote? I think generally yes, technically no, as was brought up in the debate. However, whether or not that should be the case, I think is part of the greater debate. What I would ask, especially to Ryan, who I believe does believe that all adults should have the right to vote. Let me put to you like a hypothetical. Let's say you have a marketing company, right? And up at the top, the people who make the company work are skilled marketers. Some may be on the lower end of that, but they've had the proper education, years of college, master's degrees, whatever. And they decided they're going to take a democratic vote of who becomes the CEO. And then you've also got a janitor on the first floor who cleans the toilets, didn't graduate high school, and he's directly affected by everything that happens in the company, because if the company goes under, he loses his job. However, he doesn't know the first thing about marketing, doesn't know what goes on behind the closed doors of the board meetings, and ultimately doesn't know shit from Shinola about which one of the CEOs would be the better candidate. So in your opinion, do you think that janitor should have the right to come into not right, but that they should allow that janitor to come into the board meeting and cast a vote on who becomes the CEO of that company?
Yeah, so interestingly, what you're asking me about is a form of what I think we'd often call like market socialism. So you're talking about a form of socialism here, where corporations are kind of like co-ops and function as internal democracies. And I am open to a world where like the janitor or whatever lower rung people we have some voice in the company. I don't know exactly what that needs to look like. I'm okay with having boards that vote for things, just like we have Congress votes on specific things that the every citizen doesn't necessarily vote on. But I'm open to structures where people who dedicate their lives to a particular company have some voice in that company. Absolutely, yeah.
So, well, specifically, the question was for this marketing firm. Let's say you're one of the people that has a degree in marketing. You're one of the small percentage of people on the 9th floor who get a vote in who becomes the CEO. But since they all made a collective decision to say, hey, we're going to do this by democracy, they're also asking you, do you think we should allow this janitor to come up and make a vote on who becomes the CEO? Specifically to that decision, do you think that janitor should have a say in the realm of a marketing company?
I'm open to a system where we have some representatives in there who might be selected by the people in that company. I'm open to companies experimenting with this stuff.
I guess
I think it is just for people who are directly impacted by like these companies and by the democracy we live in to have a voice in that democracy. Absolutely.
So the answer would be yes.
Should he be in the marketing meeting, like in the board meeting?
Should he cast a vote on whether or not who becomes CEO?
It sounds like
Hold on.
It sounds like the comparison would be like, should Eli be in Congress voting alongside our Congress people? No, probably not. But should he have a voice in who's representing him in Congress? Yeah, totally. So I think that's the difference.
Okay.
Eli, do you think the corporate business structure is comparable to representative democracy?
I think that the corporate business structure can be comparable to how to run anything that is business-like, which are...
You don't think it's more like a monarchy or autocracy? Like,
I'm going to for just a second. connections are all messed up. I'm gonna hop out and back in. Please behave while I'm gone. Thank you.
And while she's doing that, you should be donating. We want to see donations. I'm sorry, Eli. Go ahead.
Well, further to my point, in 2022, over 50% of Americans couldn't even name the 3 branches of government, you see. So this is why I brought up this hypothetical. It is a hypothetical, and it is oddly specific, and it doesn't translate a one-to-one. But what I'm saying is that I would say no. I think that, yes, that janitor is directly affected. I think that he should have benefits and things from his hard work. However, I think that there is a certain criteria of people who put in the specific type of effort that would allow them to have a say in what goes on in a marketing firm, about what makes a marketing firm a marketing firm. If you don't even understand the first thing about how that works, it's foolish to allow you to have a say in who should run it if you don't know who would be the best candidate, or you don't have any say if it's like to work amongst that type of candidate. Now, for example, going back to a system where you would allow property owners, taxpayers, people invested in a community, you have people who have, skin in the game that would actually make a better choice for who would run that whole entire thing.
Well, I mean, I think as I said a few times, like throughout this, like this phrasing "skin in the game," it seems like you guys conflate skin in the game with like particular kinds of skin in the game, having very specific skin in the game. But I mean, if you are subject to the laws of a country or a district or whatever, then you do have skin in the game. You are susceptible.
It seems like you only mean monetary profit. Like that's what skin in the game means. As though a poor person who policies are going to adversely affect far worse than someone who's rich enough to not give a shit about anything, right? Like they have a lot of skin in the game.
You can be poor and have skin in the game too.
And allow me, you could still own land. Allow me, if you don't mind, I'm officially going to shut down the tomato side, and we're all going to be automatically directed over to the Gauntlet. If you don't want to catch the raid, I've dropped the link into the chat, but tomato side is shutting down.